Remarketing is not necessary on Facebook ads in 2024 also. The only type of campaign that I recommend you really use in 2024 is called an acquisition campaign. Remarketing campaigns are significantly less incremental than acquisition or prospecting campaigns.
Like some of the purchases I've done myself, like I've probably watched the same ad so many times before I actually go and convert, but that's probably going to be totally different for another person.
And I use air quotes because yes, it does actually give you the most data, but I don't think it's the correct data signal.
The times when you have switched from click and view attribution to only click attribution.
The problem is that Meta is going to over optimize for those types of conversions because it wants to take as much credit as possible. It is a greedy platform.
What's your thoughts between 7-day click and 1-day click? And
the most important time to use 1-day click attribution is actually during a sale moment or a moment where the behavior matches the optimization setting. That type of bidding is going to go for the highest value type of customer, likely to purchase a higher average order value. If you were to say, oh, I'm only going to launch 2 campaigns today, and then I'm going to wait a week, and then I'm going to launch a few more later, you might just completely miss the whole forecast.
All right, man. Excited to have you on. The first thing I want to do is I'll let you introduce yourself. But before that, I just want to say that your videos and your content, I've been watching it for a while, and I think we've both been watching each other's content a little bit.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, like, people tell me my YouTube channel is underrated. And, it feels good when people are saying that, but I'm thinking about your YouTube channel, which is around the same subscriber count. And I'm just, okay, yeah. Well, if mine is underrated, then yours is definitely underrated. So,
man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So for anyone that don't really like what you're talking about in this video and want to get more into those topics, make sure you click the link in the description to Max's YouTube channel, and you can check out his content there. So go ahead and give an introduction. Talk a little bit about your experience, how long you've been in performance marketing, and give the viewers a bit of an introduction to who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Max Rosewater. I'm a growth strategist, and I work at the agency currently Common Thread Collective. I also have my own YouTube channel, and it's kind of an extension of the work that I do with Common Thread Collective, honestly, and then just share knowledge through the YouTube channel and my overall experience as an advertiser, an e-commerce operator, and also just helping e-commerce operators scale their brands. I specifically work with 8 to 9 figure brands typically. I've worked with brands of all sizes too, and so kind of got experience all over the board. My specialty is paid social advertising. In particular, Facebook ads is kind of where I shine, but I have experience with pretty much all of them, TikTok, Snapchat, a little bit on Twitter, not really Pinterest, but I'm trying to get into Pinterest more these days, actually, because I need to tick all of them off the box. So yeah, that's pretty much me. And I've been in paid social advertising, honestly, for probably only around 4 years. I graduated from college in around 2021. I don't know if a lot of people know that. I'm only 26. So that's just a little bit about myself.
Yeah, awesome. All right, cool. Let's get right into it. The first thing I want to start off with, Max, is it's actually from one of your Twitter posts back in 2023.
Okay.
Where you're posting about remarketing, and you're basically saying it's not necessary on Facebook ads in 2023 to have a separate remarketing campaign. And then you go on, and it's quite a long Twitter thread, but could you tap into a little bit more and maybe give is this still your opinion in 2024?
Yeah, this is a great question and something I still talk about a lot with different brand owners, especially new brands that come into the agency and are looking to get just optimizations made to their account. So the answer is yes, in short. Remarketing is not necessary on Facebook ads in 2024 also. And back in 2023, when I made that tweet, it was really because of the big shift into Advantage Plus shopping campaigns, into more, of course, consolidated structures. And we'll probably talk a little bit about what I think, my opinion on consolidation, you could say. But the only type of campaign that I recommend you really use in 2024 is called an acquisition campaign, which is using click-only attribution and past purchase exclusions and broad targeting. It's really that simple. You may also use CBO. I don't really mind CBO versus ABO if you're using cost controls, which is also something I recommend. And I bring all of this up in the conversation about remarketing because if you look at any single prospecting campaign, if you may have a prospecting campaign right now that has both past purchase exclusions and website visitors, and you're excluding anyone that's technically a cold audience. Now, the whole assumption here is that you are kind of asserting that within Meta only, the customer journey path actually is so small that you need to have multiple touch points within Meta between a prospecting and remarketing campaign. But if you look at the frequency of any prospecting campaign, even with cold exclusions, there's going to be a frequency likely above a 1 or even above a 2 or even above a 3. That means that remarketing is actively happening within that campaign. which means that likely the additional remarketing touch points that you're hitting through your audiences are not actually incremental. And this is funny because back in time in 2023, when I first wrote that tweet, I actually didn't have irrefutable evidence that showed me statistically that this was true besides that assumption on frequency, right? Now, we've been doing a ton of incrementality studies, which are like geo holdout studies or even scale tests with tons of different 8 to 9 figure brands at CTC. And what we found consistently across the board is that remarketing campaigns are significantly less incremental than acquisition or prospecting campaigns. So what does that mean? Everything is incremental at a certain point, meaning that every dollar you're putting in, what's the actual value of that dollar? What's the actual impact? If you were to have not spent that dollar, would it have driven that sale? Would it have driven an incremental sale, right? Now, remarketing, technically, I'm sure there's a point where it is incremental. But the point is that you're stretching your budget thin across multiple other ad sets when it's frankly not necessary, and Meta's going to do it already. And also, I don't really care how many times Meta hits someone with an ad to convince them to convert, because I don't think I should be the one to decide how many times a user needs to see an advertisement to convert. I'm actually totally fine with Meta making that decision for me and also keeping those conversions consolidated into less ad sets. So there's just so much evidence stacked up that makes it completely useless, to be honest, to use remarketing campaigns now. And I often find that people will use them as an excuse to make their in-platform ROAS look better, when in reality, you're driving less conversions and you would have been better spending that money elsewhere. I would much rather you launch another prospecting or acquisition campaign to just, in general, try to convert users from cold prospects into conversions just with campaigns in general. Just think about it. Just launch a campaign and just let that campaign be and let it do its job, because the whole job of every single campaign is to drive conversions. So why do we need to spread it across multiple other campaigns? And that's really the way I look at it.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. And when you think about it yourself, like you saying you'd rather let Meta and the algorithm figure out how many times people need to see an ad before they convert. You think about it yourself, like some of the purchases I've done myself, like I've probably watched the same ad so many times before I actually go and convert, but that's probably going to be totally different for another person just because of other circumstances where you are in life and how vital that solution is to whatever your problem is. So yeah, it totally makes sense.
It's so true too, because the assertion of like, oh, my frequency's too high. It's like, okay, what does that mean? What data do we have to back up that decision? And for example, I think with a remarketing campaign, that is actually when you make your frequency too high. The frequency will go to like 10 sometimes or plus, and I'm making this up. It totally depends on the account. And to my point, like I'm sure there's some form of remarketing that is incremental. So for example, the only type of remarketing that I would ever recommend that you do is actually using a dynamic product ad, because you can actually take the signal of the people who are on your product page and show them the exact product that they were looking at. That to me is valuable because it's actually a differentiated creative and specific to that individual user. That is going to be more incremental, most likely, in comparison to a remarketing campaign that, frankly, most people just dump the same ads that they have in prospecting into remarketing, and that's essentially useless and a waste of your budget.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you think there's any other exceptions to this? Like, is there any type of business where it would make sense to separate a remarketing campaign? As you're saying, like if the creative is very different and you know for a fact you should differentiate the creative and the communication, is there any examples you can think of where that would make more sense?
Honestly, there's not really many examples. I think the only one that I can give you is under this specific circumstance, that you do a geo-lift study, that you find the incrementality adjustment factor of that ROAS target for specifically remarketing campaigns, so you know exactly what it needs to be incremental, and then you hold yourself to that standard of that ROAS. If you don't do that, then it's not going to be incremental. And so that was kind of my point earlier. Everything is incremental up to a certain point. For example, like PMAX on Google oftentimes is very non-incremental, and you should have a much higher return than you may think you need in order for it to actually drive incremental revenue for your business. And so that's the way you need to think about it, is you need to have evidence that it is actually going to be driving, incremental new customer revenue for you. Otherwise, I don't think it's worth it. We've done many studies here, and I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here with incrementality, but I think it's really relevant in this conversation because this is a tactic that you're using in the platform. and you don't understand what it's actually driving for your business unless you have validated it. And we have a ton of data. And for example, platforms like Measured or House, they have data that they release to the public that from all of their e-commerce brands they've measured, probably hundreds at this point, that all give a directional signal that say this is true about this specific tactic and this platform. And we consistently see remarketing being less incremental. Therefore, that is your current baseline of truth that you should use in your business. And to be honest, most businesses can't afford incrementality studies, and therefore you should just use the current best truth that you have. And we know that remarketing is just less incremental. So I just wouldn't run it otherwise. We've actually done studies between prospecting and remarketing versus the acquisition structure that I mentioned. That's the more consolidated, just past purchase exclusions on acquisition campaigns. And there was basically no difference really. So it's kind of like, all right, if you want to do it, I would keep remarketing to a lower percent of your budget. But I also think it's basically a redundancy.
Yeah, man, that's super interesting. And yeah, what you're talking about there, incrementality, I think that's definitely something we'll get into now with the question I have for you, which is actually a topic that I've been getting more deep into myself. And one of your latest YouTube videos were super helpful on this. And you also talked about this in one of your tweets. I'm going to quote here: optimizing any ad account for view, to me, makes no sense. And it's letting the algorithm optimize for the incorrect type of signal you should want. So this goes into the attribution setting, and I'd love you to dive into this and give us your thoughts on the best attribution setting to use.
Yeah, great question. So to my point there, the most incremental type of conversion is likely going to be a click and then a purchase, right? And you can optimize the algorithm for that. And so people will use the optimization setting that's actually the baseline standard for Meta, because it gives you the most data. And I use air quotes because yes, it does actually give you the most data, but I don't think it's the correct data signal. So for example, attribution settings are both an optimization setting and a reporting setting. For example, if I'm optimizing for click-only attribution, I'm letting the algorithm optimize for that specific type of user behavior. And if you're optimizing for 7-day click or 1-day view, which is what it's phrased as intentionally, because it's not a 7-day click and 1-day view, it's 7-day click or 1-day view. It's optimizing for either or, meaning you're telling the algorithm that you are okay with it optimizing for a view conversion. That means that someone is scrolling on their phone and they just simply see your ad. And if they were to purchase, then that is attributed to Meta. Here's the problem. Did Meta actually drive the awareness and consideration for that conversion? Likely not. What often happens, especially if you have a large brand presence and large organic presence, it will take credit for conversions that were actually more incrementally driven through other channels. That's the most important part. But also you may say, okay, I'm okay with that. I'm actually wanting that. The problem is that Meta is going to over optimize for those types of conversions because it wants to take as much credit as possible. It is a greedy platform. Every platform is going to try as hard as it possibly can to convert users, but also report as much contribution to the channel as possible. And so the main thing that you want to avoid here is letting Meta optimize for the view attribution, which is less incremental. I would rather you spend all of your ad dollars optimizing for click, because if you think about it like this, what do you want from your Facebook ads? You want people to click right now to your website. That's the whole point. You have a website and have built the storefront, and you want them to purchase. If you can drive Meta to get every single type of customer that is most likely to use that exact same behavior, they're going to actually click on your Meta ad from Meta to your website, and then they're going to convert. And over time, compound data with the machine learning that's going to help create that outcome over and over again. I would double down on that every day, and 5 times on Sunday. It's like, that's the best thing that you can do. And of course, that's going to be more incremental than optimizing the system for something that is not driving them to your website. And what we see from this across many brands, and I believe you had like a screenshot of this that we can put up on the board, but over time, it just compounds with more website traffic, which means more data to your pixel, also better click-through rates, and overall better conversion rate because you're driving people who have that specific intent. I've seen this so many different times, and the main argument that I always hear back is, well, there's not enough signal. Well, the alternative is that you're actually optimizing for the incorrect signal, because I would rather you have less signal and make it work than optimize for the incorrect signal and think that it's working when you really just have inflated ROAS in your dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. So my follow-up question to this is then, in your experience, the times when you have switched from click and view attribution to only click attribution, what's the typical tendency you see happening immediately, and what should people be mindful of if they do this transition?
That's a really good question. So you do have to be careful. The first thing to be mindful of is it's going to make your ROAS look worse in Facebook, which I think is an ego thing and people are going to freak out about. And in reality, if you look right now in your dashboard and you go to the breakdown tool, and at the bottom of it, you click on compare attribution settings, click on 7-day click, and look at the difference between 7-day click, 1-day view reported ROAS and 7-day click. Whatever that 7-day click reported ROAS is should be around your baseline target, and same thing for CPA, you can see the breakdown. This is super important to ground yourself in reality. That is the more likely the true impact of Facebook ads on your business. And that's what you should be trying to move the needle on. The goal is actually to make the game more difficult for yourself so that you can hold yourself to a higher expectation, a higher standard, and then actually improve that number, because moving that specific number, the 7-day click ROAS, in the correct direction is going to be a better impact on your business. And again, we see this all the time. Now, the problem is oftentimes we're also moving over to cost controls. So it's actually a really difficult situation oftentimes for a brand where you're going to have less data because you have less conversion data through the cost control most likely. And you also are cutting view attribution, which can make it difficult for the cost controls to function. And so what I often recommend doing as an initial switchover, if depending on the structure and state of the account, if this is like a really large e-commerce brand spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, you're most likely fine to just cold turkey switch over everything to 7-day click and cost controls, right? The alternative is that you actually don't have a lot of 7-day click attribution or 7-day click conversions in any ad set. Oftentimes we'll see that there's so much view that no ad set in the history of some of these smaller ad accounts has ever left the learning phase when it comes to click only attribution, which sounds crazy, but it's true. We see it all the time. So the thing you don't want to do is switch over to cost controls and 7-day click and then be like, oh crap, like nothing's working. And it's like, of course it's not working because you haven't trained the machine learning how to do its job to acquire click conversions at a specific CPA target. So what we recommend is almost, you could think about it like, I call it data consolidation, where you're going to run a highest volume campaign on 7-day click to gather 7-day click conversions through the ad set. And once you've gained around 50 to 100 conversions, honestly, it's up to you when you want to make the switch, then you would switch over to cost controls. So I know I went down a whole rabbit hole there, but I think they're kind of one and the same, because oftentimes people who are using 7-day click, 1-day view are also not on cost controls, because it's kind of just the default setting that Meta will push you into so that you'll burn a bunch of money. And that is the reason why we help brands switch over to something that is going to reduce the inefficient ad spend and also get you the most incremental type of new customer revenue. And of course, you would also want to add the exclusion. So now you're making sure 100% that you're forcing the algorithm to drive you fresh clicks to your website. You're not hitting past purchasers, and you also are not over inflating view attribution.
Yeah, man, this is really interesting stuff. And it totally makes sense. Like when you switch over to optimizing for something else, of course, it kind of makes sense. Yeah, your algorithm needs to relearn. And if you've been optimizing for the quote unquote wrong signal for a long time, then yeah, it will make sense that it needs to readjust. And yeah, you talked a little bit about cost controls. We'll get more into that. Before we get into that though, what's your thoughts between 7-day click and 1-day click? And when would you use the one or the other? And in what scenarios would you use which one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's actually super relevant right now because it's October 11th as of us filming this, and Black Friday is upon us. The most important time to use 1-day click attribution is actually during a sale moment or a moment where the behavior matches the optimization setting. So very similar to what we just talked about, attribution settings being both an optimization setting and a reporting setting. When you're thinking about the behavior of a customer during a sale, you want them to click that exact day and then convert. So the reason why we would optimize during a sale is just because of that. It matches the consumer behavior of what you want. Now, the main consideration here is how long is your sale and how much data or conversion volume do you think you can get through your ad set? If you struggle getting enough data through each ad set, my recommendation is actually to still use 7-day click. And here's the thing, the conversation in question surrounding, do I have enough data or do I need to get more data from, for example, the 7-day click, 1-day view question? That's still why oftentimes I recommend using 7-day click, because you're letting the algorithm have a little bit more flexibility over the course of the attribution window to gather data, gather conversions, add to carts, and clicks, for example. And when you're in a sale moment, you really want to make sure that you can get through the learning phase as quickly as possible, because you can likely have the advantage of just that, of getting a ton of conversions quickly. And so if you can't do that on 1 day click, I would say 7 day click. However, if it's only like a 2 day sale and something very explosive that you think is going to have like a very fast ramp up period, I would optimize for 1 day click, because it'll match better to the consumer behavior.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes total sense. All right, so let's get a little bit into cost controls. You have a bunch of good videos on this. I also made some videos on this topic. For people that aren't aware, like there's quite a lot of people that I talk to that just still run with highest volume, highest value, and they haven't really tapped into cost controls. Can you give a little bit of your experience and what you typically see when you go take one ad account from highest volume or highest value to cost controls, and what you should expect when doing that switch as well?
Yeah, the first thing that I see is that brands are spending a significant amount of money at a loss. And the whole point of cost controls is actually to flip the script on the optimization setting. Highest volume is saying that we are going to spend your entire budget every single day. We're getting as many conversions as possible, irrespective of your CPA target. But we flip the script and we say, actually, we only want to spend to gather volume surrounding the efficiency target. We actually don't want you to spend the whole budget every day. We only want you to spend it if you can hit the efficiency target. And that's what every e-commerce brand should be optimizing for, because everyone who says you need more data and you need more learnings, well, there also is a point with every e-com brand that you would just never spend that dollar if it was too inefficient. And this is what we see time and time again, is we see these creative testing campaigns or just campaigns in general that are spent way below their marginal frontier or way below break even. And that is just not beneficial for anybody. You should not ever do that unless you have irrefutable evidence that you have like a really strong LTV for your business, and specifically like a 30 or 60 day LTV. Otherwise, that cash is just never going to come back, right? So what we see, I had to go there first, honestly, because I think that's the first thing just to ground us, and like the why behind why highest volume versus cost controls is actually very important in my opinion. And I think a lot of people overlook that. So it really depends on the brand, what happens exactly when you do the switch over. Now, if it's a brand where you need to do data consolidation, like we talked about before, where, for example, where you need to run a highest volume campaign for a time being on 7 day click to then switch over to cost controls, sometimes it can take a little while to warm up, but what we often see is a significant reduction in spend. Now, here's the first reaction is you're saying, crap, I need to get through spend. If I don't spend, I'm not going to make money, which is true, but you don't want to spend inefficient dollars. And so the goal here is actually to not open up your cost controls to force spend through inefficiently. It's also not to fire up more highest volume campaigns that were already inefficient to spend more. It's actually to find more cost control campaigns that can spend at your efficiency target. And often what brand owners have is actually a creative volume issue or a creative operations issue, where they are not, frankly, making enough ads to actually sustain the ad account. And we see this all the time, and that's the key to cost controls is creative volume. And if you're frustrated by that point, I would say, well, it's actually a much better initiative to continue to fund efficient spend in your ad account that can spend the same amount you were going to spend otherwise at significantly higher efficiency, while pushing the creative volume to make that outcome possible versus just ripping through inefficient ad dollars, right? Instead of spending the dollars you burnt, spend that on creative volume that will actually get you spend at the efficiency. And so this is like the funniest question I always get as a follow-up is like, okay, well, if I can't get creatives to spend on my cost controls, like what do I do? What do I do? And I'm like, okay, well, how many creatives have you launched? And they're like, okay, I've launched 5 campaigns or 10 campaigns. And I'm like, okay, that's not anywhere close enough. And just for the viewers watching to conceptualize this, and this is not by any means to discourage anybody, one of my clients is making like 200 campaigns a month, right? 200 campaigns a month. That's like 3 ads per campaign. That's like 600 ads. If you're spending, for example, similarly to what they're spending, which is like $300,000 a month, and you're making like 20 ads, a week or something, it's just likely not good enough. And you need to reconsider the investment. Because think about this, and this is, of course, speaking more to like 7 and 8 or 9 figure brands that are spending a grip of ad spend every single month. What I'm saying to you is don't spend that money. Literally take a chunk of the money. If you're spending $300,000, take 10,000, take 20,000, take however much money you need to create the creative volume and operation system that I just described. Then what you'll actually end up doing is still spending the $300,000 because you'll actually be able to spend it now that you have creatives that can fund the ad account, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle where you're like, the only scenario or rational outcome is actually to increase creative volume once you realize that the only thing holding you back is simply that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it also, by spending more money instead of on actually creating stuff that works for your business, is also going to give you learnings that will be beneficial long term, right? If you have certain concepts, ideas, hooks, angles that work better, that's going to be super beneficial moving forward as well, because you have new stuff that actually works that you can iterate on. So
That's
yeah, that
so
makes total
true.
sense, man.
Yeah, and even to wrap it around to the original question, because I think I got pretty far off of it, but it does relate to why cost controls won't work. I think, to be completely honest, like if cost controls aren't working in your account, then you need to reconsider something about your offer. You need to reconsider something about your ad creative and your landing page. You have to look objectively at your metrics. Look at your soft metrics. Is it a click-through rate, outbound click-through rate issue? Is it a conversion rate issue? Is your AOV too low? All of those things are levers that you are responsible for and that you have the ability to change and pull those levers to actually impact the performance. If you're not correctly identifying where you need to course correct in your ad account against those soft metrics, then you're not going to be able to fix the problem. And if you just blame cost controls for not spending, then you're not going to get anywhere, because they're actually not spending because they are protecting you. They are trying to protect you from inefficient ad dollars. And okay, maybe you have the argument that says, okay, highest volume is working for me, but the question is how long is that going to work for? Because you're going to meet a rough patch and you're going to spend past your efficiency threshold eventually once those ads fatigue. And if you don't have the correct decision-making process and framework to actually help course correct against that and automatically reduce that spend, then you're not going to be in a good situation. And what I see over the very long tail horizon of highest volume is that people think it's working, but then if you look at the total spend over the course of the account, it's actually not efficient typically. So that's another just bit of advice there for switching over to cost controls.
Awesome. So what's your thoughts on the different cost control bid strategies you can use then? You have ROAS goal, right? We have cost per result goal, and we also have the bid cap. Can you just talk through like your experience with the different ones and which one you would use in what kind of scenario?
So if I'm looking at all the bid strategies that you can use for cost controls, the main ones that stand out, of course, are cost caps or cost per result goal and ROAS goal. They both function the same way, where from the time of impression and over the attribution window, they're trying to average out that either CPA or ROAS over the course of that attribution window. Now, if you look at them both differently, the question people ask is, okay, what's the difference between ROAS goal and cost capped bidding? They're actually two different types of customer cohorts and optimization settings. So similar to how people will use like interest audiences, which I don't think is necessary anymore, this is actually the closest thing you can get to that, where there's two different types of behaviors. Highest value type of bidding or value-based optimization, which will be the extension of ROAS goal cost controlled bidding. That type of bidding is going to go for the highest value type of customer likely to purchase a higher average order value. And the interesting thing here is you can actually bid for the marginal outcome you want. You can bid for ROAS, meaning that even if you have multiple products within one campaign, Meta will bid and bid accordingly against a blended ROAS target that you give it and be able to create that specific outcome because you're trying to get higher value customers. And since you can bid for that marginal outcome, you're good to bid for a ROAS goal. And that's really special because up until now, oftentimes we've had cost controls or on lowest cost bidding, which is more likely to get the cheapest type of conversion. Somewhat, this is not a perfect science, but somewhat more likely to have a lower average order value because of that nature. And you bidding for the cheapest cost means that you need to also have SKU specific campaigns because you need to understand what your specific CPA target needs to be for each campaign in order to create the right return against a predicted AOV. And so depending on what your average order value is and what your CPA target is, whereas AOV divided by CPA will be ROAS, that's how you're setting your cost control. And then you have to also adjust your cost cap from there to create the right marginal outcome that you're looking for, which you should absolutely have a ROAS target for every SKU and every single campaign. And if you don't, then you need to dial in your unit economics and understand what the net profit outcome is that you're looking for from every single campaign, right? And that's why ROAS goal bidding is a really great alternative, especially for brands with very large varieties of different average order values. I'm thinking particularly for apparel brands for multiple reasons. One, your margins may be different across products, which I think is helpful to be able to bid for the marginal outcome or a blended ROAS there. Also, you can't really control in apparel websites more than maybe others what people are going to buy. And so generally you want people to buy more. You want higher value purchases. And so oftentimes I'll see just large average order values with apparel brands where people are buying like entire outfits, and you can even push people in that direction through your creative messaging too, which I love to do. It tied in with ROAS goal to help just really get the correct outcome that I'm looking for. So that's really the main difference. Now, the one thing I haven't talked about is bid caps. Bid caps is actually setting a bid ceiling, meaning you're not willing to bid above a certain threshold, and that gives the algorithm zero flexibility. It actually means that Meta is not going to bid above or below, like with cost per result goal bidding over the attribution window. You're saying, okay, if my bid is a $50 cost cap, or sorry, a $50 bid cap in this case, then you cannot bid above $50 ever. It actually only will bid below and up to $50 because you're setting a ceiling that you're willing to. What this creates is a lot of profitable spend, but it also restricts the algorithm, very similarly to our conversation about data and the restriction of that data. Now it's also restricting a lot more inefficient spend. So you're only spending, you're never going to spend past your incremental CAC of what that point of diminishing return is. And some people really like that and see strong success. I've seen accounts absolutely crush it on bid caps. Me personally, I like having a little bit more flexibility just so I can drive the machine learning a little bit more, especially since we're already restricting it in multiple other ways, in my opinion. And that's really how I'm looking at it. I personally don't love bid caps, but if you talk to Andrew Ferris, he would say something very different.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, my experience is we have one account that's been for a few months, it did really, really well on bid caps.
Nice.
And I think the reason was there was a period where the products that we advertised were super relevant and the campaign got a lot of data consistently. So the bid caps were working perfectly. But over time, as the product wasn't as relevant anymore, we needed to switch over to cost per result goal to keep the campaign spending. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, that's a great point. Like during sale moments, and this is an interesting thought from, I was at a Meta Summit last December, or it was not December, but it was really close to Black Friday. It was probably around the same time a year ago. And at the Meta Summit, a bunch of actual auction engineers, the people who are creating the algorithm, and I spoke to one of them directly about cost controls. And they said their direct recommendation during Black Friday is actually to use bid caps because you can set the maximum ceiling you're willing to bid and then inflate your daily budget as high as you want it to be. So for example, if the most that I would ever spend on any given campaign is like $20,000 a day, then just set it for $20,000, set your bid tight where it needs to be for profitability, and then just let it spend as much as it can, because it's really going to restrict the downside here. And you're going to completely demystify the question of how much should I spend? Well, just let Meta make that decision for you. Of course, surrounding the confines of how much you would ever be willing to spend. You don't want to set it for like $1 million and do something stupid like that, because that's just going to be probably too much spent, right? But at the same time, what it will likely do is you're going to capture all of the auction demand that could potentially be in that campaign and not leave any money on the table. And I think that's a really important part of using cost controls.
Yeah, that's super interesting, man. What do you think about setting the budget if you're using a cost per result goal or ROAS goal similarly during a campaign period such as Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or if you're running Black Week or Black Month? What do you think?
Yeah. And to rephrase your question or say it back to you, you're saying, are you asking, would you run ROAS goal bidding and cost control bidding at the same time? Or like ROAS goal bidding and cost capped bidding at the same time?
Yeah, that question, but also how would you run one or the other, if you would run them at all, during a promotional period such as Black Friday?
Yeah, great question. So during Black Friday, I think this is the time to have the most robust account structure possible. And what I mean is actually leave nothing up to chance and throw everything at the wall. And that may seem hacky. I actually don't think that it is, because you're simply pulling all of the levers of your entire toolbox and using all the best practices. Everything that we talked about today, I think you should be doing, including ROAS goal bidding and cost capped bidding at the same time, because those are two different types of users, and you can get more bang for your buck out of existing creative assets. They're going to optimize for different types of users, so you may as well capture both at the same time. Now, the same thing goes for Advantage Plus shopping campaigns. You can use BAU campaigns with ROAS goal bidding and cost cap bidding, and then you can also use the separate tactic for ROAS goal bidding on Advantage Plus shopping campaigns and cost cap bidding on Advantage Plus shopping campaigns. I actually recommend that you do all of it. There's also like a web and shop component here that I know people are probably talking about a little bit more these days, where you can use those on Advantage Plus shopping campaigns and on the other campaigns. I would probably just use them. If you have web and shop, use them on both the ROAS goal and cost capped, but you may not have ROAS goal rolled out yet on web and shop. We're actually like just getting it in some of our accounts right now, which is exciting if you haven't seen it yet.
Interesting. No, I haven't seen that yet. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's actually rolling out. So spoiler alert, it's going to be really cool once it does, because that's just like the future of Meta is all going to be value-based optimization. And I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this technically, but I was talking to our Meta rep named Walker 2 days ago, and he was telling us that Meta's investment in value optimization is like one of the biggest things right now that they're working on. And they're trying to get from like a smaller, I think 5% of all accounts right now are like using some form of value-based optimization, which is very small in Meta's portfolio. And they want to increase it to like 20-something% by the end of, in the next 2 or 3 years. And so Meta is both directionally pointing and saying like value optimization is kind of the next big thing. That's what we want. And it makes sense too, because they want consolidation. They want as much data to be in fewer ad sets as possible. And that actually leads to the correct outcome that could create that reality. And so to wrap it back to the original question, you should be using as much as you possibly can. Like my favorite Black Friday structure, honestly, is to have all of my business as usual campaigns on cost capped and then maybe a few ROAS goal variations. And then what I'll often do is take all of those campaigns with different ads and I'll just mush them all into a catch-all at Advantage Plus shopping campaign on ROAS goal, and then just let it rip and put like a super high budget. And oftentimes that Advantage Plus shopping campaign will be the top spender and get a ton of data signal. And on top of that, if you want to use the existing customer budget cap, which a lot of times we put to 0%, I think during Black Friday, if you don't care where your sales come from and you actually want some retention spend, that's a really good opportunity to also have those same ads and get the signal in the consolidated asset with ASC, and then use like a 5% budget cap, and then you can get a little bit of signal from retention too.
All right, awesome. The next question, which I think we'll finish up with,
yeah,
which you talked about in one of your latest videos on your YouTube channel. I thought it was really interesting. We're kind of not fully using the same strategy, but it's similar. But you talk about it as the ad account front loading strategy or something like that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that actually looks and why you think it's so great?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this question, because this is one of my favorites. It's like, I think this is one of the best media buying tips that anyone can conceptualize. So the idea of front loading your ad account is when you look at a forecast, and people usually do monthly cohort forecasts, for example, between new and existing customers, you should have a new customer acquisition target for your ad account, and you should have a specific new customer revenue goal for the month. And so if you're looking at your ad account, what you want to do is think about your ad account in two separate states. There is something we call previous concepts or previous campaigns. They're all of the campaigns that are currently running that are moving over into the new month. What you want to do is, on a kind of like a daily basis, honestly, you want to try to guesstimate how much each campaign is likely to spend on a daily basis if you were to hit your specific target ROAS. So if your target ROAS is like a 1.35, just making this up for the example, and you have a campaign last month that spent $5,000 a day and it spent it all at a 0.8, okay? Well, I would not want to roll that over into the next month thinking that it's going to spend $5,000 a day, because it didn't hit the efficiency threshold that I need. So I'm going to mentally say to myself, okay, how much around should that spend to hit a 1.35? And then forecast that into your media plan and say, okay, this specific campaign on a daily basis is going to spend $2,500 a day, and it's going to hit my 1.35 because I'm tightening up the cost control, okay? That's the idea of previous concepts. You want to make sure that you're predicting the daily spend of all of those concepts that are rolling over from the previous month into the new month, okay? So now that we have that covered, what you want to do now is understand, okay, if I take the daily estimate across all of those campaigns that are going to now hit the efficiency target, what is the gap in spend that is left between that and my actual spend target for the month? Because likely you're given a spend target. Maybe it's $200,000. Spend $200,000 at a 1.35, okay? So if there's a gap on a daily basis, you need to fill that with new concepts. Because again, you don't want to open up your cost controls just to get inefficient spend, and you don't want to run highest volume to just rip through inefficient spend. Also, you need to fill the gap with creative volume. And so front loading your ad account is having a ton of creative planned at the beginning of the month that you can push into to then unlock new spend. And the goal is to find what I would call like the golden nuggets, the best performing campaigns that actually can spend at your target efficiency. And then if you can find those early in the month, there are major benefits because you're not scrambling mid-month with less efficient campaigns that aren't through the learning phase and putting yourself in a bad situation where you're having to quickly course correct. You're actually demystifying all of that. You're putting all of your cards on the table early. You're actually planning more spend at the beginning of the month to account for some inefficient ad dollars because even cost caps aren't perfect. Some of them aren't going to perform. And what you want to do is quickly weed out the low performers and then find the high performers that you can scale vertically. Versus if you were to say, oh, I'm only going to launch 2 campaigns today, and I'm going to wait a week, and then I'm going to launch a few more later, you might just completely miss the whole forecast because you never found those campaigns that would have given you the scale and efficiency you need to meet your overall targets. And I just see time and time again, this is the best strategy that you can do as a media buyer. And it makes media buying so easy, actually, because if you just always plan accordingly and are prepared for every month, you can look at your forecasts and say, okay, coming over from the previous concepts, like crap, I've got a $10,000 gap to target, and I don't think that I'm going to make it if I don't launch new campaigns. And also, I maybe don't have enough campaigns right now based off my estimations that are going to fill that gap. That's a crappy feeling to have as a media buyer. And I'm sure everyone here has been there where they're like, I just don't know if we're going to make it because we don't have enough creatives. And planning that in to the point back in time about operationalizing your creative strategy, that's why it's so important, just so you can get to the reality where you feel comfortable and you have the resources that you need to unlock efficient spend and hit your forecast. And that's really the idea of front loading your ad account and setting yourself up for success for every single month's forecast.
Okay, cool. And to follow up on that, when front loading, you have concepts and ideas ready to go when you need to fill that gap, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
What are you looking to separate out from the original campaigns that you launched in the beginning of the month? Do you try to usually different offers, or is it just the creative? Is it the ad copy and angling? What's usually the difference between those new campaigns that you launch?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on what your marketing calendar looks like. And I think that any brand should have a really robust marketing calendar too, meaning tons of cool moments planned surrounding cultural events, product drops, just fun moments that are happening, of course, plus a very strong supplement of evergreen ad creative. And so the front loading idea, to be honest, at least in my head, is very focused on evergreen ads, because I think you always need to have a strong backbone of evergreen creatives pumping in your ad account versus something that, to be honest, is your kind of guarantee for the month. Like you're like, okay, this product drop we know is going to create more momentum, and we should already have concepts planned surrounding those moments. And so the front loading part is a little bit detached, I think, from that, but it also goes into like the difference between previous concepts, how we plan things, and what we call the new concepts. The new concepts on the evergreen side is what you'd front load, but at the same time, you need to have new concepts planned surrounding all of your marketing moments. And that's super important. So I'm glad you brought up this point, because if you have a product drop or if you have a sale coming up, of course, you want to have a very strict amount of creative volume ready to go surrounding those moments too, so that you can capitalize on that spend. And oftentimes that can make or break your forecast too. And so it kind of ties into that in the marketing calendar planning plus the forecast.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right, man. To finish it up, last question. And this might be the hardest one for you to answer because you have so much knowledge and experience within performance marketing. But if you can only give one piece of advice to someone that's looking to scale with meta ads in Q4 this year, but also going into 2025, what would that one piece of advice be? You can only choose one.
Wow. Yeah. I really like that question. The main advice that I have for everyone watching is that during Black Friday, especially, It's one of the most important times of the year to realize revenue, but also realize profit margin. And you do not need to spend so much that you push way past your point of diminishing returns. You should stay first order profitable and make sure that you're taking into account your discounting into your ROAS targets so that you're actually making profit. I see oftentimes brands get way too excited during Black Friday and they want to realize a ton of revenue, and that's great, but oftentimes this is also the most margin realizing portion of the entire year. Brands are going to realize like the most margin this month of any other month in November. And I think that it's really important to ground yourself and know your targets, know your unit economics, and don't spend past first order profitability, because it's just not going to help you going into the future unless you have a very clear plan of understanding the time horizon in which you're going to realize that future revenue. That's my main advice, honestly, because I think that what I am always trying to do for brands is help them understand that you just don't need to spend past your point of diminishing return. You shouldn't ever do that really on any ad channel. And I promise you, it is possible. So if you're sitting there saying like, I can't be first order profitable, this is impossible, it's never going to happen, I promise you, it is very possible. And I see it every single time that we take over an account and we switch it over. I know that Ollie sees this as well. And it's something that we do with cost controls as well. And it's just kind of the name of the game. So that's my advice to you, to hopefully give you some optimism. If you're not first order profitable right now, I believe that you can do it.
Awesome. Love that. All right, man. Thank you so much. Again, the viewers, click the link in the description and you'll find his YouTube channel. Do you have any videos planned that people should be on the lookout for?
Actually, yeah. So I just finished up a video like before this call, was editing it. That is going to first drop on the Common Thread Collective channel and then also go on my YouTube channel probably within the next week. So it's going to be a full Black Friday, Cyber Monday analysis. And the most interesting thing about this video is that it's going to be very specific to this Black Friday in 2024, which is one of the most unique Black Fridays that we've seen in years, because Cyber Monday is falling in December for the first time in 4 years. So there's a very large portion here that is discussing, okay, what happens with revenue, because revenue is falling out of November into December in our forecasting, which is kind of a mess. And then also, of course, there's the United States election, which is going to have a very large impact on CPMs throughout the rest of October and into early November, and how you should plan your media spend around that. And so I think you guys are going to love it. So definitely check it out next week. It's going to be an interesting one.
Awesome. Now you're getting me excited as well. Can't wait for that.
Yeah. I have to tell you some stuff about it off call so you can prepare in advance.
Yeah, please do. All right. Thank you so much. And let's make another one in the future. This was so fun and so much practical and valuable advice. I'm sure everybody is going to appreciate it. And
yeah,
I sure
love
did.
sharing it. And just to hype you up a little bit, your channel is also amazing. And it's just so fun to be able to connect with people who love sharing this type of advice through Facebook ads, Google ads, and just e-commerce in general. And you've been crushing it too. So love what you're doing, man.
Yeah, thanks, man.